blood spilled. Yet again, Matha was set to leave Tara. As he was going out of the central camp, he was called aside by Fionn Micheál to where Cormac was standing in the company of a few others next to a large cabin. "The High King wants to say something to you, Matha," said Micheál. "What?" said Cormac distractedly. "Oh, yes, Matha, you have done well, son. Is there anything you want as your reward? Did you eat those sheep I gave you before?" Once again Matha thought of asking whether there was not any symbol on the vellum that might help him with the task he was about, but he just said, "No, sir, thank you." "The boy never took your sheep, Cormac," Conan grinned, catching Matha's glance. "Do you not see that the only thing he wants is for you to tell him his future from that moth-eaten scrap of leather you carry around?" Cormac hesitated. Then he took out the vellum and unfurled it with great tenderness. He turned to the side as he stared intently at it. Matha realized at that moment what Conan's joke was. It was so dark in that part of the enclosure on that moonless night that Matha was barely able to make out his own fingers held in front of him. And Matha's eyesight was better than that of any of those older men. Still, Cormac stared at the parchment and spoke. "Scribing and deciphering promise the greatest advances to our kind, son. Your future is good, I see. Your generation must learn these skills and move our people forward." Nobody there said anything that might embarrass Cormac further as he continued to stare blankly at his precious script. Micheál then stirred Cormac, who said, "Oh yes, and call Flaherty here for me." When Flaherty, the quiet man who was Cormac's most trusted Brehon, arrived, Cormac merely said to him, "Now, Fla, you know what you're to do." Matha's mood sank when he realized that Flaherty was being sent with him. He did not even bother asking what kind of gift this was supposed to be. Matha was eager to go, and would have preferred the company of 10 sheep now, or just one. At least that would have been a welcome gift for his mother. What was he to do with a man like this? But he showed gratitude to Cormac and left with Flaherty. As they walked quietly, with Flaherty regularly pleading with Matha to slow down, Matha listened to the man grumbling, apparently about what Cormac had said. Squiggles on parchment. Great advances indeed, he spat. Learning how to forget is what it is. Trading an art of the brain for an art of the hand. Learning to make men lazy. Learning to unlearn the great skills of mind. Learning how to place all of our history and law onto the skin of a cow, where it could burn or wash off and leave us without any knowledge, without law, and without any recollection of those who have gone before us. Matha tired of this and stopped. "But, great Flaherty, is the good king not allowed a vanity the same as any one of us?" he said. "He pretends he has great knowledge on a piece of skin." "Who are you to mock him for not having spent half his life like your kind do, learning cants and verses?" Flaherty stopped and stared at Matha in disbelief. "You have a good deal to learn, I see," he said. "First, you're right. Cormac is a good king, though some of the earlier verses about his rise to power are not so glorious. Sometimes behind the greatest hand of good is bad trying to unspeak itself. And you wrong me to say I mock him for his infatuation with written words. His wish for that skill angers me merely because he himself provides the best argument against it. Our High King, my boy, may pretend not to know the answer when he asks a question, and he may look wistfully at the scrap of skin he took from a foreign land. But that is all camouflage and play acting. The same man knows more than any olive I have met of the laws, of the boundaries, of protection of sacred trees, of duties, of correct payments for punishments for crimes, and of the poetry of olden times, also of plans for new kinds of farming. None of it stored on vellum, but in his head." Matha did not know whether to believe Flaherty, but he was inclined to. They continued the journey in silence. He still did not ask why this man had been sent with him. He was sure he would find out soon. Matha was determined this time that nothing would deflect him. He led the way southwest through Osree, with this thought in his mind and with his teeth clenched in determination. They had most of the journey behind them when they met a slight man with sandy hair and a face that looked boyish. He seemed to be in some distress. He walked in a half-run, with his head rolling from side to side, mumbling. Matha stopped to greet the man, but was determined not to take pity. Flaherty took Matha by the arm and whispered that he must ignore the man. They had more important things to do than tending to fools. The unfortunate man took longer than most people to communicate even his name. Sayre. He had an impediment in his speech, and Matha wasn't sure whether the hold-up was in his mouth or further back in the head. He was getting in a knot trying to tell Matha something. The king must be urgently informed of something or other. He gripped Matha's arm bruisingly tight. Matha was curious, but then Flaherty reminded him that nearly every disturbed person on the roads thought they had a message that the king needed to hear. The sun had risen every day before Matha took to the roads, and it would still work without him. As Matha pulled himself free of the man's grip, he saw a look of terrible disappointment. He felt angry. Why should he be the one that people latched onto? What was it in his face that made this annoyingly slow man think he was the one to share troubles with? Surely Matha had earned an untroubled return home. He ignored the man's continued pleading. Before he resumed his journey, he pointed northeast and saying, "Just go, Tara is that way." Matha came over the top of the Slieve-Dara hills, as he had done so many times that the track through the bracken belonged to him as much as it did to the sheep. On this occasion, though, he was not merely vaguely hoping. He was fully expecting it to be back to normal. As indeed, there it was. Even though he had been sure of it, when he saw it, he was overcome by delight. The valley of his Finne, his people, with the weak chief's wooden hut at the far end, it didn't look as grand as it had done when he was younger. The places of his neighbours and cousins, the borders, an arrangement of which had all made so much sense now and seemed randomly strewn along the brow of the hill. Smoke was coming from some chimneys. There was none from his mother's bahan at the near end. He walked more lightly down the hills than he had walked in years, leaving Flaherty trailing far behind him. When he got to the cabin, he found nobody inside. His mother must still be working for the chief, though it was Samhain and was supposed to be a day for everyone to be in their own homes. When Flaherty caught up with him, he raised his eyebrows in disapproval, but mercifully said nothing. Matha went out the back to the bit of bog that had been left to them. He was confused. The patch of bog looked much smaller even than he remembered it. But there was his cousin, down for his daily visit to the pony, crouched over the black creature, and strangely, he didn't look a bit bigger. Matha had been trying to picture how tall and big and possibly hairy he would have grown in the years. The boy looked up and then stood up and said, "Welcome, travellers, welcome. I'm afraid there is not much to offer you in this house, but if you come with me to my father's cabin, you will be well received." Matha was shocked. "Queeve, it's me, Matha." For a while, Queeveen refused to believe him and thought it was some kind of trickery. Eventually, when Matha named every member of their families and recounted how they used to go netting plovers together, Queeveen said, "But how could you have changed so much?" "What? I expected you to have changed more, going on 7 years and 7 days today." Queeve looked even more puzzled, and Matha did not want to offend him, so he changed the subject. "You are a solid person to have minded my poor horse all that long. I promise you I tried every way I could to come back sooner." "What are you raving about?" said Queeveen. "Our Matha left here only 7 days ago. I would know, because I had to listen to the crying of his heartbroken mother every morning since." Matha stood looking in silence. He looked at Flaherty for support. But the Brehon was staring into the distance with his lips moving silently, no doubt reciting some of his complicated memory rhymes. Some way behind Flaherty he noticed that the deranged man, Sayre, had followed. He stood, shifting feet and grinning uselessly. Matha waved him away angrily. Indeed, Matha saw that the sticks he used for rabbit snares were exactly where he'd left them. The weeds were only a few days bigger than the cabbage rows. It was good that he had learned so well how to take note of things without expecting to understand them all. Whatever the truth of the passing of time lay, it could be sorted out later. Matha had a more immediate task now. He came over to the horse, which looked even smaller than he had remembered it. He certainly wouldn't be able to think about climbing on the back of such a short animal anymore, as his legs would be touched the ground. He looked down into the pony's eyes. She was a little worse, but still breathing, and apparently still eating as much as Queeve could find to bring her. He reached into the folds of his cape for the parcel that had been long and carefully packed there. He took it out and started unfolding the layers of sheep wool that had been protecting it. He also took a sharp blade from another part of his cape. Queeveen stepped back. He looked like he was afraid now. Matha had no time to explain. Queeveen said, "Wait, I'll go and call your mother. Just wait." Matha made the mistake of waiting. His mother wasn't long coming, but others must have also heard that there was a stranger in the valley claiming to be Matha. His mother arrived and he went to hug her. "Do you also not know me, mother?" he asked. She burst into tears and said, "A man? I don't understand. As I do not understand anything that has happened in the past days, but I know my own son, I most certainly do." In the time that they were embracing each other, he didn't notice a cloud descending. He said, "Edna, there's a job I have to do here before we go inside. Then I will tell you everything." He went over towards the pony with the bowl and the blade in his hand. He didn't like to hurt the animal, so he did it fast without taking time to think about it. He whispered in the pony's ear, "Stay with us, friend." He then put a slit in the soft flesh over her shoulder. Blood started gushing. He went to catch some of it in the bowl where he knew it had to be rubbed. But as he brought the bowl close, the cloud swooped. The sky was black with crows, rooks and greys. They came squalling and jabbing at him with long wicked beaks. Queeveen was throwing stones, and his mother was flapping her shawl at them, but they paid no attention to that. Matha knew well enough that the crow is a cold-hearted gentleman. There was no point in trying to be friends with him. But it was also wise to avoid making an enemy of him. He put his hands up, trying to protect himself, hoping that this was not personal, that they had merely been directed to send a message to him. They kept delivering their message even as the bowl slipped from his flailing hands. It dropped in the granite quern, which his mother used for crushing small grains. Even as it lay broken there, the crows continued. They only stopped when a small hand grabbed a piece of the bowl. It was Sayre, and Matha had to admit that he was glad that the callous crows now turned on him as he ran off, finally convinced to go home and mind his own business, or so Matha hoped. Sayre disappeared over the hill with the black cloud following him. Matha looked at the remainder of the bowl, his heart broken with it. Queeveen came over, obviously now appreciating that the bowl had contained some solution to the problems. He said, "Why did you put your hands up for them to get at the bowl?" "Well, do you not think that his eyes might have had some importance for him?" Matha's mother snapped at Queeveen with the dangerous defensiveness of every mother in her voice. "Otherwise he'd be wandering around this bog blind forever, and what good would that be?" The blood was still spurting from the dying horse. Matha desperately picked up a bit of the bowl and rubbed the blood in it. He noticed the horse seemed to kick a little, maybe a kick of death. Then he tried, without any part of the bowl, rubbing the blood between his own fingers. He felt heat in his fingers, and the numb power radiated from his hands. The horse stopped bleeding, and was soon standing up and shaking her mane. more Matha rubbed his fingers, the stronger the horse became, until it was back to the finest and fattest it had ever been. His mother stood back speechless. Even Flaherty looked at him with some trepidation. Caoimhín turned and ran away. Matha took his mother inside and lit the fire. Soon neighbours began to gather in. They greeted him with some reservation. He noticed that each corner went first to the urn at the entrance and sprinkled some of the water from it on their faces. It was just the water from the spring at the bottom of the cabbage ridge, and nobody had ever thought it held any special blessings before. From his sack, Matha produced salted boar, dried damsons, bread and sweet cake that his friends in Tara had given them for the journey. There was absolute silence round the fire as he talked, even though he told only the barest outline of his travels. As the evening went on, only one of his neighbours was not there to celebrate with Matha and his mother. A man who lived on the other side of the valley said that he had seen Kerbal climbing onto the roof of his cabin, going mad and yelling at crows since getting the news of Matha's return. The neighbours talked cautiously to Matha, like he was the one who might do them harm. He heard Mighty Keoin, a deaf man who didn't know how loud his voice was, whispering to Aoife Tollive. So it's clear the lad came back to put a spell on Kerbal. Well, I don't know, and that's the truth. But 7 days away, and he comes back a man, with no fear of those who wronged him, she responded, too quietly for Keoin, but not for Matha. You'd have to admit that it's not a very usual go-on. Came back just to drive Kerbal mad, continued Keoin. Never forgave him for taking the land. And why would he? But wait now till we see what medicine he has in store for Flahone, the chief. That'll be a bit of sport for those that wait up to see it. The chief of Matha's Finne had sat himself at the warmest seat next to the hearth, as though he was a regular caller. Shameless, he said. Isn't it great to see a young fella from our own area getting on so well, getting to know the High King and Fionn Micheál and dear knows who else? You'll put in a good word for me, of course. Matha looked at the small, pathetic man and couldn't believe such a person had wielded such weight over his mind, had caused him to lie awake so many nights filled with anxiety, imagining in vain that one day he might realise how unfair he had been. But Matha didn't feel anger towards the chief. He had since met 100 like him. He was an adept political man who just wanted to be liked by most people and whom nobody really disliked, even though he did nothing good for them. His only skill was in talking nice to everyone, and in always eyeing out a good corner for himself. Ahem! Came a voice that was used to being listened to, clearing a path for its words. Only then did Matha remember that Flaherty was there. He had not even told anyone that Flaherty had been sent by the High King. Even sitting hunched on a stool far back from the hearth, the authority of his tone imposed silence to the room. Cormac's gift was to be revealed. This young man here is now an esteemed adviser of the Cormac MacArt, High King of all Ireland, and a free man in the clan lands of Micheál, said Flaherty. Then he stood up and directly addressed the chief. What I have seen here confirms that a serious wrong has been done to him and his mother by you, Fla. Cormac has sent me. Give your people here a reminder about certain sections of our laws and customs that appear to have slipped your mind, and to ensure that the wrong is corrected and that justice is set right. Slipped his mind, eh? Keoin mumbled aloud. I'm afraid that the mind of Peggeen's own there is very little to slip. Oh, yes, Your Honour, said the chief, ignoring the giggles and standing to go. Will you come with me to my humble home so we can discuss these fine points of law in peace and quiet? Flaherty ignored the chief and started to give a lecture on the rights and obligations of a Fleadh. In the middle of his lengthy and sombre recital, he stopped and began to speak in terms so clear and simple that even the children present were in no doubt as to his meaning. He said that Ehna ní Dúling, Matha's mother, was full and free Kayla with rights established before time itself. She had paid her tributes to the clan and to the poor, while others had failed. A fla who thought he could take her property just because she was a woman was at best a fool, but more likely a thief. Since the wise woman, Brige Amwi, had justly interpreted our customs as they applied to women, nobody but a fool or a thief could have referred to law as an excuse for removing the livelihood of someone in Etna's position. The offence was made worse by the fact that the person taking advantage in this way was an elected fla of his finne, the very person who was supposed to ensure her safety and protect her rights. Flaherty stopped for a couple of minutes, in which there was only the sound of a baby coughing. Then he continued in a different, pronouncing tone. It is my judgment, and that of Cormac MacArt, that Fla Owen has disgraced himself and his position. Matha was as silent as everyone else. He had not known that Cormac was aware of anything about him, let alone that he knew of his mother's ground being taken, or of what kind of man was Peggy's own. The murmurs of approval started among the gathering, but they quietened down when Flaherty looked around and asked why the other 16 people of the council had not prevented this breach of justice. Everyone was very contrite, and Matha began to feel sorry for them. When the Fla offered no defence, Flaherty began to recite old cases that give an indication of the kind of cess or compensation Matha and his mother were entitled to. That included restoring to double the extent Matha's mother's land, demanding a senior place on the council, instructing the council to elect a new chief, putting Peggy's own to labour on Etna's land for a period of at least 5 years, giving 5 of his cows and 10 of his beehives to Matha, and the rest of his property to the poor, and putting the stranger to the road. There was a hush as people examined the floor. Oh, and I almost forgot, added Flaherty. Matha, of course, has the right to cut the hair and beard of Peggy's own. The chief stroked his long white beard, at once distressed but not protesting. He knew how it went, and he was at Matha's mercy. Matha's mother said she just wanted the family land and her cows back, and no more. Matha consulted with her, and then told Flaherty that he greatly appreciated his learned words. He hoped in time that he would learn even a fraction of the ancient wisdoms that he had at his disposal. He promised him that he would never rely on calfskin and would store all he learned safely inside his head. His respect for the Brehons had been restored more than amply, and he wanted most of all that Flaherty would go back to Cormac to relay the appreciation of himself, his mother, and of Fla Peggy's own for having helped them to clarify matters in their valley. But they would not be looking for any punishment for the Fla, nor would he request a place on the council. They should only replace the Fla in time and in the natural course of events. Peggy's own went white-faced with relief and got on his knees, still holding his beard, to thank Matha most profusely. You and Etna are entitled to extend that mercy to Peggy's own, said Flaherty. I would advise him to value it. And I thank you for your respectful words about my profession. You would be welcome to study with me at any time. But I saw what you did yesterday with the pony's blood. It is not me you will be studying with, but the Wren man. My main study from now on will be of this ground, said Matha, and of course our chief will show due respect for my mother from now on. A muffled laugh went round the cabin. People seemed to think that Matha's words were laced with a threat, but none was intended. Matha now knew this Fla better than any of them did. any implication of menace or put down that others might have heard in his words rolled off the chief like water off a duck's back. Matha was just talking to the chief in the only sort of language he could understand, the language of traded favours. And Peggeen's own responded without falter, "By Dagda, and no better woman there is in the land than your mother. I've often thought it. A lovely little woman, and a very tidy farmer. In fact, in my opinion, she should have more land. I had been meaning to say that to her before you went away. I have always had my doubts about that foreign chancer. I'll sort this out, rest assured, sir. No better man than myself to sort this out. No better man than Peggeen's own to take care of his people. You can rely on me to make sure she is well taken care of." As the night wore on, Matha slipped outside. He knew he shouldn't be uneasy with his own people. He should be eager to get as much of their company as possible after so much lying. But as he looked out at the path leading uphill to the woods in the dark, solitary night, he was surprised to find it calling. There was a time he could not have imagined being far from any other human, moving across bogs and woodlands in the shadows of the sweet night air. Yet he had come to cherish dark solitude. And then he also couldn't help thinking about the great fires far away. It was going to be harder than he had expected to clear his head of the bonds he had left behind, the untold secrets, the excitement, and even the danger. These things had been quietly stealing a share of his soul all the time he was dreaming of a simple, peaceful life. His mother came out and stood next to him. Neither of them said anything as they saw a carriage moving quickly along the laneway outside their cabin. The reins were held by a stout black cat, sitting bolt upright, wearing a tunic and a smirk. He had no obvious companion, though the contents of the carriage were covered in animal pelts. The cat and his cargo quickly disappeared into the distance. "Come back inside the cree," his mother said after some time. "You'll catch your death of cold out there." Then she told the neighbours he was very tired, and there'd be other nights for him to tell them more of the world. When first light came, Matha was up and walking around the lands. It still seemed so much smaller than he remembered. Even with the ground he intended to get back from the chief, there wouldn't be enough work there for more than one person. His mother, with the assistance of the black pony and Quiveen, would be able to see to it without strain. His mother would be well catered for. He also started to think again about the little worried man whom he had not helped, even when he was being chased by crows. The recollection was not settling well on him. That confused person might not be able to find his way to Tara with his story, whatever it was, and even if he got there, he would hardly be taken seriously. He went to his mother, who was up and rekindling the fire. She looked sad. She didn't have to explain anything. She said, "You go now, son. But you be sure to call in here to me every time you're passing." "I'm not going for long," he said. "It's only this one thing that I have to sort out. Then I'll be back. It might only take a day or two." She had never been a woman who liked fussing and tears. She turned away and went to call Quiveen to yoke up the little pony and make a start on ploughing. Matha set out, fully intending to return within a week at most. It didn't take him long to find another traveller who had also met Sayre. Sure enough, Sayre had been unable to follow directions to Tara. He had given up hope of getting anyone to listen to him. He had headed back towards home to keep his notions to himself. Matha got information about where Sayre lived, along with very strong advice not to go there. As he got closer, he met more people who had known Sayre for a long time. They were amused that he was wanting to ask Sayre anything. Sure, poor Sayre is a little bit light. He doesn't say much. And what he does say, you wouldn't want to pay a whole lot of attention to. Everybody reinforced the caution about visiting Sayre's abode, high on a cliff overlooking the deep inlet of the sea where foreign traders often pulled in. No person other than Sayre can go up there and come back in one piece, a kindly woman warned Matha. There's a very heartless family of wolves that owns the woodlands up on that hill. Sometimes they even come right down into the settlement at night, looking for anyone foolish enough to be out of doors. It doesn't matter whether you're weak or strong. If you're out on your own, they will run you patiently until you tire, and then they will take you. Nobody but Sayre would ever go up there among them. They say he reared the boss woman of those wild hounds from an orphan cub, and that's why the family's not allowed to harm Sayre or his animals. Matha thanked the woman. He had been long enough wandering now to know that Mara Fada had been right. He too had no reason to fear wolves. He didn't try to explain this to the woman. When he told this people about this before, it had made them look at him warily. Matha got up to the cave where Sayre had set himself up. Dagda bless this house, said Matha as he approached. Sayre stood silently for minutes, his face paralysed by confusion. Matha tried to remind him of their meeting, but that wasn't it. Sayre remembered him all right. When he finally unfroze, Matha gathered from the gabbled speech that there had never before been a human visitor in Sayre's steep nesting place. He put a pot of water on top of his little burning pile of sticks and made some kind of mushroom broth for Matha. That's the nicest drink of soup I've ever tasted, said Matha truthfully. I'm very sorry to have passed you by on the road without helping you, and very thankful to you for drawing the birds away. Everyone on the lower ground said Sayre lived like a wild man, eating berries, roots, crabs, and insects he collected in parts of the hill that nobody else could get to. However, in front of the hillside cave, it appeared to Matha that he had been cultivating several ledges, and there were onions and turnips still in the ground. People also said, as if it was a fault, that he ate no flesh of bird, fish, or other animal because he was too fond of them alive. There was nothing, however, wrong with creamy milk and the small, rich eggs that he offered to Matha before he would settle down to try to communicate his information. There were a couple of goats and several bantam hens down on lower ledges, and he kept peering over the edge to look down, checking that they were doing all right. As they sat, Matha came to better understand some of the man's noises. He had his own system for making himself understood. When his guest was fed, Sayre started trying to tell about an object that was worrying him. A huge thing, like a giant fruit, golden yellow in colour, had been washed up on the shore in a remote part of the estuary below. Matha remembered all of the advice. No attention was to be paid to this little man, with staring blue eyes and pieces of sorrel escaping out of the corner of his mouth when he chewed. Matha believed every word. Sayre had seen something, but it was probably just some debris from passing traders, washed up by the tides. His mind at ease, he started thinking about going back home again. Sayre saw this and became quite insistent. Matha, tell Tara something wrong. They must know. You have honoured me with fine hospitality, said Matha, after thinking about this for a while. So I will honour your earnest request. I will let them know in Tara. Sayre asked him to stay another night before going to Tara. No, said Matha, rudely, thinking of other things and forgetting that not everyone knew of his gesh. Sayre stared at him with hurt all over his face, filling Matha once again with regret. He allowed himself to think about it, spending a second night in the same place. A strange thing occurred then. Normally, the first admission of such a thought would fill his body with a wave of anxious restlessness, but this time it didn't come. There was not the slightest sense of anxiety. Understand this, he said after a long silence. It would be the first time in 7 years I've seen the sun rise from the same place twice in a row. If I have to leave in the middle of the night, don't be offended. Know that it was just that I was overcome by other thoughts. Sayre nodded quickly. This was something he understood completely. Matha settled down that night on the same heather bed that Sayre had arranged for him, expecting every moment to be driven out of it by his faceless torment, but it did not happen. He slipped into a most comfortable sleep and woke to rays of very beautiful sunlight entering Sayre's cave through the tops of the same scraggy birch trees through which it had entered yesterday. Matha was elated. He had another very good bellyful of egg and oatmeal before he set off. The gesh was gone. At Tara, he was welcomed by Droleen and others, who no longer even feigned surprise at seeing him travelling again. This made him all the more determined that he would prove them wrong, prove that he really was done with the travelling life. He met with Micheál and told him what he had heard. He said solemnly, but not entirely honestly, that he believed his source to be completely reliable. He did his job too well. He described the object so fantastically, a multicoloured ship-like thing stranded on the rocks, that Micheál and Conan were not the only ones eager for the outing. The weather being summery and the evenings long, even King Cormac decided they would like to go and see this thing. Cormac unfortunately insisted that Matha must lead them there rather than going back home just yet. Within a day there was a large entourage, including the High King of Ireland, standing at the foot of the cliffside where Sayre lived. Cormac was looking up and shaking his head and saying only a madman would venture up there. As if the ledges weren't dangerous enough, no sensible person, having heard of this particularly bloodthirsty Matha family, would venture up there. Conan, you are mad and lucky in the Black Mountains. Why don't you go up there and bring the man down? That sheer mountain is not part of the Black Mountains, said Conan, laughing and not moving. Good luck runs out quickly unless it's accompanied by a small bit of sense. Everyone waited quietly. They all knew the story that the king could talk to the Matha. He would be safe. But Cormac seemed to suddenly develop a tight chest and said he needed to lie down. 2 or 3 of us could go up, and if we have our spears on alert, that wolf lady will be wise enough to keep her distant, said Micheál. Then he looked at Matha and said, but it makes more sense for Matha to go alone. It seems that there is no wolf family that wishes to quarrel with him. The king gave Matha a peculiar look. Matha didn't care. He was already starting to clamber back up. Sayre was surprised to see Matha. He was not used to people keeping their word to him. He had assumed he'd never see Matha again. He took Matha down the fast way. Matha was terrified as he tried to follow Sayre, jumping up and bobbing down from ledge to ledge along the cliff face where even the nimblest goat would not tread. With a sprained ankle and bruised head, he eventually made it to the ground level, where Sayre stood waiting. He was most thrilled to meet the people from Tara. He could not believe that the High King himself had come to listen to him. He was very proud. Then he forgot all that. He ran along in his peculiar fashion, talking only to Matha. The others came after Matha. They were all tired and torn when they had arrived at the deserted beach. But they forgot all that immediately. What they saw there astonished the Fiannamen as much as it did Matha. The thing on the beach was not the ship that Matha had invented. It was even stranger. It looked like nothing else, only an enormous yellow damson. Though what kind of tree it could have grown on was beyond imagination. The thing was bigger than a ship. It was bigger than Micheál. It was bigger than a castle. It covered most of the sand on the beach. The king gazed in admiration. He saw beauty in many things. He had no suggestions as what to do about it. Well, let's go at it, Gold said. If it's as tasty as the normal apricots, they'll be satisfying sucking for thousands of people here. Let me just stick my old spear in here and taste its flesh. Micheál held him back. Don't be hasty. Let Gowl go ahead and try it, said Conan. For all you know, the juice in this thing could be poisonous. Whisht, said Micheál. I thought I heard something. To the disappointment of the many soldiers and followers who had now gathered with buckets and bowls, expecting the giant fruit to be pierced, the king agreed with Micheál that it was best to just watch the thing for a few days. Yes, why don't we just watch it go bad? Grumbled Gowl under his breath. Most of the Fianna people present headed off to enjoy the hospitality of the Daisha clan not far away. Sayre wanted Matha to visit him again. That was no punishment. Matha was already thinking he would like to find his own perch someday, somewhere windy and isolated that he could go when he didn't want anyone to interrupt his thoughts. During the night, as Matha again slept soundly, Sayre left the cave. The next morning, Matha was awoken by Sayre slapping him with a stick and dancing from one foot to the other, unable to contain his news. He had been back down to keep an eye on the thing, fearing correctly that the soldiers who were on watch might fall asleep, not taking the whole thing very seriously. Only Sayre was awake to see what happened. All of a sudden, a hole come in the side of the old ball, right near the ground, he babbled. And then doesn't the world of small, hairy horobaricles start hatching out of it. They marched like proper little soldiers, on down a bit of a board in 2s and 3s and 4s or 5s or 6s or 7s. They were smaller than a good-sized dog, but had woeful teeth like an owl's scurvy. Matha didn't know what a horoboricle or a scurvy was, but guessed there were things that lived safely inside Sayre's head. He again hopped and slid down the jagged hill to call the others, when Micheál and Conan were woken Sayre. Sayre, with Matha as his interpreter, explained some more. And they had a power of muscle on them, and looked like they could be fair mean. They weren't happy or humorous-looking little creatures. They walked on their hind legs and carried daggers, bows, and scythes over their shoulders. As they left, they made straight for the cover of the bushes and the sand dunes, and disappeared out of my sight anyway. I can't say whether they really disappeared. I'll tell you one thing, though. There was a queer lot of them. Sayre couldn't recall how long the procession had lasted, but he knew it was a long, long time. It was nearly daybreak when the last of them finally emerged. The next day, the whole country got to know all about them. There were reports of swarms of strange and fearsome horobaricles, Sayre's name for them, and was as good as any, attacking people and soldiers all over the country. They could be killed in battle by spear, arrow, sword, pitchfork, or with a hoe, if a very experienced person was operating it. But there were just so many of them, and they seemed to have no fear. Even if a person being attacked could kill 20 of them, more would keep coming at them till he got tired and the horobaricles got in close enough to start hacking him with their daggers and taking slices of him with their scythes. The battles went on for many, many days. The Fianna broke into small bands and scoured the country, wiping out groups of them wherever they could find them. Many farmers and hunters had to join in, doing their best with fecks, sickles, snares, and rabbit spears. Sometimes, where there was a large group of them, they would kill a soldier before the Fianna group got the better of them. The ordinary people were ordered to travel in groups of no less than 5. That way there was less chance of being overpowered by the horobaricles. Everyone got to hate and fear the horobaricles, hatched by that beautiful apricot. People started telling terrible stories about their powers. Some traders began offering special remedies, which they said would keep the creatures away at night. People were told that a certain kind of toadstool put over your doorway would ensure the horobaricles would never enter your house, that putting salt in your garden would burn their feet, that drinking young ewe's milk would give you immunity from their swords. None of these things worked, of course, but believing made some people less afraid. After months of fighting, people started saying, maybe we're never going to get rid of these things. Maybe we've just got to learn to live with them. Maybe we just have to get used to them killing some of us if we are foolish enough to go out on our own. Micheál wasn't too happy with such attitudes. He was prone to raising his voice in an uncomplimentary way when he came across people who had given up. But what else is there? People dared to complain. It's many months now and the Fianna's not making any progress in the battle against them. Maybe we should try to make peace with them. They're not interested in peace, said Micheál. Their only interest is in taking over this country. We'll defeat them or they'll defeat us. There are no other roads this situation can follow. But secretly, Micheál himself was worried. After so many months, they had hardly made a noticeable dent in the Haraborical numbers, and the pursuit was getting more difficult. The Haraboricals were learning. Their already good hiding strategies were ever improving. They were learning to blend in with the autumn colours and burrow in when there were too many soldiers about. They were devising new ambushing strategies. They were doing more damage by the day, and every small victory against them was ever harder won. Micheál talked to Drolin and to the king at length. They seemed to be looking straight back at him for the solution. Then one day, word came to Tara that Sayre was asking for Matha again. Matha made his way down to us three. Micheál came with him because he was starting to appreciate that the quiet little man didn't make a habit of wasting anyone's time. He would not be calling Matha for a chat about the weather. Sure enough, there was Sayre pacing around the bottom of his cliff, ready with another surprise for them. The sight of him. Sayre's arms were covered in bite marks. He talked to Matha. The little old Haraborical died. The little fella died. Went plop it did. Flop. It's all right now, friend, said Matha, rubbing some ointment he had onto Sayre's arm. You can tell Fionn here what's on your mind. Flop. Haraborical explode. Haraborical all over Sayre's cabbage garden. Haraborical died on me, he said, still talking to Matha, very distressed. What died, Sayre? The Haraborical. And tell me, said Micheál, what did it die of, Sayre? A harmless little small, weensy, tiny bit of old cake is all, said Sayre, almost in tears. Sayre never meant to kill Haraborical. What kind of cake? Sayre was only trying to protect myself, Sayre said to Matha. Trying to keep the little Haraborical off me, to distract him with a bit of food. And how do you know that it was the cake killed him? Said Micheál. How did I know? Did he die yesterday when Sayre fed him eggs? Or the day before that when Sayre fed him turnips? No, sir. He was happy as Larry them days, no dying out of him. No, he didn't die at all with the eggs and the turnips. Sayre, Conan, who had now joined them, intervened. I thought you said you were trying to just distract him from attacking you. That's right, sir. And yesterday, and the day before that, demanded Gowl, now standing over Sayre, you've been feeding the little demons that are attacking your own people. Not only a fool, shouted Gowl, but a traitor to his own kind. Step back, Gowl, said Micheál. Let only him here who has never done a foolish thing call this man a fool. There was silence. It was fairly plain what had happened. Sayre was a man who had made pets of everything from eagles to rats. Despite being bitten all over, he had been quietly trying to see if he could persuade one of the Haraboricals to be his pet. But the barley cake he fed it didn't seem to have agreed with it. Micheál grabbed a couple of stale loaves and headed out to try his luck. He set the things down on the ground near a grove where he knew there were Haraboricals lurking and observing. The smell of the cake seemed to turn them into Luthermans, forgetting all their shrewd hiding tactics. Five of them rushed down from trees into open ground to grab the bread. They squabbled and gobbled, and within a minute, where a normal person might belch, these Haraboricals did exactly what Sayre had said. They went flop. They exploded, leaving a considerable mess. Cormac commanded that up to half of every clan's winter stores of barley be opened, and everyone in the country lay down their hoes, their sticks, their hammers, their spears, and go to the grinding cairns and baking pans, working day and night. Everyone had to bake large griddle beds and put them out in the fields and woods near them. There was a lot of grumbling. Sensible people were sceptical. From bitter experience, they were suspicious of any command to erode their carefully counted winter food stores. "The king won't be there when your children are dying of the hunger," said one man, who became well known when he went round the country opposing the call. "Don't do what the powerful want you to do. Don't follow like sheep. They won't be here when you're trying to live on nettles come Imbolc and spring." "Well, of course you won't need so much grain for the winter if the Harabaracles have your parents, your children, and yourselves eating come sound," was the response that Conan sent his men to deliver. So people tried the plan out very cautiously at first. Once they saw for themselves how well it worked, the baking started in earnest. There was flopping all over the place, and only when the baking got fully underway did people start to realise just how many of the Harabaracles there had been, lurking in every bush and clump of long grass. For look, it did not take half of the winter stores to bring it to an end. A single loaf brought tens of them squabbling for a bite. Strangely, good learners as they were, they never did learn how to resist the bread, even if they were well able to see how it was destroying their nation. It had a lethal attraction for them. After 3 days, the baking died down. There were griddle breads still left untouched under bushes and next to streams. It was all over. It wasn't going to be a very bad winter because there had been an upsurge in the rabbit and grouse populations. Nobody had been able to hunt while the Harabaracles had been hiding in grass and burrows waiting to kill hunting dogs and ferrets. It was decreed that the surplus stock of rabbits should not be touched until the lean days of winter started to bite. In the meantime, a great scatter of people descended on Sayre's beach to take another look at the apricot. It was now providing the sweetest flesh, where some of the local children had been unable to resist cutting into it. It was full of juice, as if it had never been inhabited. There was a great party on the beach. Sayre was the centre of attention. After some time, Micheál came over to Sayre and gave him a bag. "Take that home with you and mind it well." "What is it?" "You'll see when you get home, and remember, mind it well." Sayre was a good man to stick to instructions, but he wanted to know as soon as possible what the small moving ball was. And so he left that beach without saying another word to anyone other than himself. No more damson juice for him. No more slaps in the back from people praising him while still mocking him. Head swinging, he took a straight line out through the bushes at the speed of a scalded cat, chatting away to himself. "Sayre tired now. Go on home out of this windy old day. Too many people. Sayre better off at home. Weather might turn. Not right time for dancing round at the sea. Sayre tear on home now as fast as he can. Sayre not open bag yet. Poor little thing inside, or big thing maybe. A warm thing, though grand little thing surely. Sayre hurry on home." Matha was worried that in his excitement Sayre might fall over the cliff, bundle and all, so he followed him. They made the short, steep journey to Sayre's little kingdom rather quickly, thorns adding to Sayre's existing scratches. He put some sticks across the entrance to stop whatever it was from escaping. Then he opened his bag. Inside was a brindle pup. Even though it was still a ball of baby fat, from the markings it was unmistakably the son of Bran, Fionn Micheál's most famous hunting dog. He was the finest pup from a litter Conan's great hunting dog Sheena had produced with Bran as the father. There had never, nor has ever been, a happier person in all Erin than Sayre was that day. As Matha stood to leave, Sayre stopped stroking the dog. He reached into the magpie nest at the entrance to the cave and took out the shard of bole, which he held tight in his fist. Clearly he had no intention of parting with it. He held out his other hand, and Matha reached into the tunic to give Sayre the piece he had been carrying around. Sayre put both into the happy magpie's collection, his reward to the canny little warrior crow for having saved him from the mob of bigger cousins some days before. He said, "Matha won't be needing these. People need Matha now. Matha headed back to Micheál's fortress where Droling was waiting for him. The old druid started talking like Matha had never heard him talk before. There was an outpouring about the ancient times and peculiar happenings. When Matha eventually retired to the cabin that was reserved for him forevermore, he slept well. He woke with his restlessness still not returned. Though I have learned a lot in my 7 years, said Matha to Droling, I feel there is still a lot I don't know. I will give as much time to learning as you can spare for teaching me. 7 years, spat Droling. That is the blink of a horse's eye. You know nothing. The first lesson is humility. Are you ready for that? Matha was ready. So humbly began the making of Matha, whose name was invoked in reverence and in fear by generations of people to follow. As for Sayre, Matha occasionally called on Sayre in his later travels. The dog turned into a big, well-fed pet, never trained to hunt because Sayre didn't like to even think about that kind of bloody carry-on. One thing was for sure, though. There were few people who ever thought to tease or make fun of Sayre from then on. The huge, muscular dog developed a sense for a sneering tone and quickly persuaded people to show respect to Sayre. He and Sayre were inseparable to the sad day they both died many years later. Most likely in the other world, the dog is still there, taking as much care of Sayre as Sayre takes of him.